Donald Trump says Brazilian President Luiz Inacio Lula da Silva can call him anytime about the 50% tariffs Washington has imposed on Brazil. The measures are largely due to Trump's anger at the prosecution of his ally, former President Jair Bolsonaro, on charges of plotting to overthrow the election of Lula in early 2023. The tariffs are expected to hit Brazilian commodities hard, especially beef, coffee, sugar, steel, and aluminium. But Lula is not budging, and there is no indication he will intervene in the judicial process. For more on this tiff between Trump and his Brazilian counterpart, I can welcome Anthony Pereira, who is director of the Kimberly Green Latin American and Caribbean Center at Florida International University. Good morning, Anthony, and thank you very much for joining us. On this tariff row, these tariffs that have been imposed by the Trump administration, who stands to lose more? Will it be the United States or will it be Brazil?
Well, I think there'll be losses on both sides because, as you said in your just now, some of these products that will be tariffed at this 50% rate are products that Americans use frequently, like coffee. So I think it's going to there are going to be impacts on both sides. There really isn't that much room for maneuver, I don't think, for the Brazilian government, for the Lula administration, because the main demand, and this was a Truth Social post that was put out there by President Trump on July 9th, it was mainly about the trial of Jair Bolsonaro, which Lula is not in a position to interfere with. And so it's very unusual in that sense that it comes out of this projection of President Trump onto the Brazilian scene of his own difficulties with the law because of the alleged attempted insurrection in 2021. So it's, the likelihood is that Brazil will retaliate with reciprocal tariffs. And President Lula has said he will do that. But overall, his popularity and the approval rating of his government have gone up as a result of this.
And Jair Bolsonaro's son, Eduardo, has expressed thanks for the Trump administration's sanctioning of Alexandre de Moraes, the judge investigating his father. But it has not been universally welcomed in Brazil.
No, I think the overall effect, the immediate effect of the announcement of these tariffs has been to marginalize the Bolsonarista movement and make it weaker. POE, a widely regarded magazine, a sort of monthly magazine of ideas and current affairs, their cover has a list of names of traitors on it, including Eduardo Bolsonaro's name. So there are a lot of people on the center left who are distancing themselves from this kind of action because Eduardo Bolsonaro has embraced the idea that the tariffs are necessary to try to pressure President Lula, the Brazilian Congress. But many people are saying, well, what kind of nationalism or what kind of patriotism is this if the people, Eduardo himself is willing to impose suffering on his fellow countrymen in various economic sectors that are very important to Brazil. So it's politically sort of it's ricocheted, if you like, or boomeranged for the Bolsonarista movement, these tariffs.
And just turning back to Trump for a moment, Brazil is one of the few countries in the world that the United States actually has a trade surplus with, something that has been true since 2007. So is Trump really like cutting off his nose to spite his face, effectively, in that this is going against his stated objective in imposing tariffs, but he seems to have his eye on something else completely here?
Yeah, I think it's very inconsistent with the messaging that we got before. You remember on Liberation Day, Trump had a big, poster of sort of how big the bilateral trade deficits were between the U.S. and its various partners, and the tariffs seem to have something to do with that. This is completely different. This is a country, Brazil's had a trade deficit with the U.S. in both goods and services for a long time. And despite that, for this political reason, this rather bizarre political reason to do with the trial, they're getting the biggest tariffs, the highest tariffs of any of the U.S. trade partners. So it feels, I think, The shock on the Brazilian side is this is arbitrary, it's capricious, and they can't succumb to it. They have to maintain their position. So I think it'll be interesting to see the economic fallout. I think it's as you were suggesting there just now, it's likely to be as heavy on the U.S. side as it is on the Brazilian side. And in the end, this is only 12% of Brazil's total exports go to the United States. So it will be able to weather this storm, I think.
And Donald Trump says that Lula only has to call him, or he can call him. Lula is clearly not going to intervene in the judicial process. But if he were to call Donald Trump, what might Trump expect him to actually come out with? Will it actually be something more transactional and perhaps make a deal, as Trump likes to say?
Yeah, there might be some room for some transactional negotiation. The U.S. exports ethanol, for example, to Brazil, and the Brazilians could say, well, we could lower our tariffs on that U.S. product if in sort of reciprocally, because there are a long list of exemptions of Brazilian exports to the U.S. That won't get the 50% tariff. They'll only get the 10%. So there might be some room there. But there was a Brazilian group of senators that came up last week, and the foreign minister came to the United States, and they didn't get very far. So that is not very encouraging that they were not able to make much progress. Apparently, there was a talk between Foreign Minister Vieira of Brazil and Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary in the United States, but that didn't go particularly well. So the fact that these delegations weren't able to make inroads doesn't make a possible Trump-Lula conversation that promising. But it's always possible. And Trump is very transactional, so there might be some way to diminish some of these tariffs.
Thank you very much for that. Anthony Pereira, Director of the Kimberly Green Latin American and Caribbean Center at Florida International University.